pleased to announce that we're building on our reputation as a climate leader. What we're not going to do is start telling people how to live their lives. We're not going to start dictating to people what they do, but we are going to be clear that that involves hitting the Clean Power 2030, but it's not going to be one in which we tell people how to live their lives.
The recent Prime Minister's Questions (PMQ) session in the House of Commons marked a critical moment in Keir Starmer's political career. Just a few months into his role as Labour leader, Starmer finds himself under heavy criticism from detractors questioning his ability to lead and deliver on the promises of change he made during his campaign. This collapse at PMQ has captured the attention of the media and public opinion, becoming a national talking point and raising concerns about the stability of his administration. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us a lot. Let's begin. Starmer's intervention in the PMQ session was marked by strong attacks from the opposition, especially from prominent figures like SNP MP Pete Wishart. Wishart seized the opportunity to highlight the contradictions and shortcomings of the new government, criticizing both unmet promises and measures that, in the view of many, have negatively impacted the most vulnerable sectors of British society. Wishart in particular questioned whether Starmer's austerity is even harsher than that imposed by the Conservatives over the past 14 years, posing a question resonating with the electorate. Is this the change the country expected? The timing is especially delicate for Starmer, who took office amid high expectations. After years of Conservative governments and austerity measures, British society anticipated a different approach, a government committed to social justice and policies that would ease the burdens on the most affected sectors. However, the perception that Starmer is repeating past mistakes and adopting austerity measures has led to deep disillusionment among his supporters. The PMQ session exposed not only Starmer's political vulnerability, but also his lack of a solid narrative to counter the criticisms received. In addition to opposition criticism, Starmer faces a seemingly unstoppable decline in popularity. According to the latest UGV polls, his approval rating has reached historic lows, reflecting an accelerated disillusionment among British citizens. This situation becomes even more concerning when considering that Starmer came to power largely due to widespread fatigue with the Conservative government rather than strong support for his persona. Many Labour voters believe Starmer would represent a break from Conservative policies, but reality has turned out to be different. During the session, Starmer attempted to defend his decisions, arguing that they were necessary to restore the country's economic stability. However, this rhetoric does not appear to have convinced either the audience or his colleagues in Parliament. Wishart and other opposition MPs pointed out the contradiction between Labour ideals and Starmer's actions, harshly criticizing the decision to cut benefits, such as the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, and limit support for larger families. These measures have been interpreted as a betrayal of the progressive values that the Labour Party has historically defended, and the impact on public perception has been devastating. The drop in popularity and loss of voter trust not only affect the stability of his government, but also call into question the viability of Labour as a progressive alternative. The decisions made in his first months in office could define his leadership, and experts suggest that Starmer faces a political identity crisis. Britons who voted for him seeking change feel betrayed, while critics seize every mistake to reinforce the narrative that his government is a continuation of the failed policies of the past, a betrayal of Labour values. Keir Starmer took on the leadership of the Labour Party with the promise of a new direction for the country, but his austerity policies have generated disappointment and criticism both inside and outside Parliament. In his short time in power, several of his decisions have raised concern among those who trusted that a Labour government would put an end to the restrictive measures characteristic of Conservative governments. The situation has reached a critical point as the impact of these policies is beginning to be felt in people's lives, and many voices have begun to question whether the new Labour leader truly represents change, or if his administration merely continues the austerity tradition of the past decade. Cutting subsidies, such as the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, is one of Starmer's most controversial measures. This benefit, essential for helping elderly people cope with the cold British winters since 1997, was eliminated in a decision that took both the public and several members of the Labour Party by surprise. Many see this action as a sign of insensitivity towards one of society's most vulnerable sectors. For those who rely on on this support to cover basic heating expenses, the cut not only represents a financial burden, but also reflects a lack of respect for pensioners' rights and dignity, igniting anger and frustration among many. Beyond pensioners, Starmer has introduced measures affecting families with more than 2 children by limiting the social support they receive. This type of policy, which seems to ignore the complexities and challenges of large families, has been viewed by critics as an unfair imposition that penalizes low-income families. Rather than offering solutions to reduce child poverty, this measure is perceived as a setback in the fight against social inequality, something that contradicts values traditionally upheld by the Labour Party. For many families, the removal of this support translates into additional sacrifices, and in some cases, difficult decisions such as reducing access to food or other essential resources. Starmer's policies have provoked intense debate within his own party. Some prominent Labour members have voiced their disagreement with these measures, pointing out that these cuts contradict the social justice philosophy that has always distinguished the party. The situation worsens when Starmer takes disciplinary measures against those who dare to criticize him publicly. The recent suspension of MP John McDonnell, who openly criticized the decision to cut pensioners' benefits, has heightened internal tensions and raised concerns about the level of tolerance and openness in Starmer's administration. Starmer's austerity strategy is also reflected in his relationship with Britain's economic elites and wealthiest sectors. While cutting benefits for pensioners and limiting support for large families, critics point out that his government has shown little interest in implementing policies that tax the privileged sectors or redistribute wealth. This perception of favoring the rich at the expense of the disadvantaged has further eroded public trust, as many feel that the government is prioritizing the interests of a wealthy minority over the needs of the majority. Why does the British public feel betrayed? Since taking office as Prime Minister, Keir Starmer has seen a steep drop in his popularity. This is surprising to many, as the Labour Party came to power with the expectation of being a refreshing option after 14 years of Conservative governments. However, within months, Starmer has gone from being perceived as a hopeful figure to an increasingly isolated leader, whose connection to the public's reality seems to be eroding. Approval ratings have dropped alarmingly, and data reflects a profound disillusionment not only with his policies, but also with the perception that Starmer is disconnected from the real needs of the population. One key factor behind this fall in popularity is the perception that Starmer is prioritizing political and economic interests over the values traditionally represented by the Labour Party. The decisions to cut social benefits and limit support, such as the elimination of the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, have left many voters feeling that their trust has been betrayed. These cuts have caused great outrage, especially among those who expected a Labour Gov Keir Starmer's plummeting popularity can also be attributed to his apparent insensitivity to the concerns of low-income groups and pensioners. For years, Britons have felt the weight of austerity policies and cuts implemented by Conservative governments, and they expected change with the new Labour government. But rather than relief, they were met with decisions that, to their eyes, reflect a lack of empathy towards their daily struggles. The elimination of the fuel allowance and the restriction of support for larger families, for instance, not only financially impact recipients, but also send a clear message that this government is not willing to prioritize their needs. Moreover, the discontent is not only evident among the public. Within the Labour Party itself, Starmer's leadership has faced criticism from key members who anticipated more progressive policies and fewer cuts. The recent suspension of MP John McDonnell, who spoke out against the benefit cuts, has only intensified the issue. This move has been seen as a tactic to silence critical voices within the party, which has created internal divisions and raised doubts about Starmer's leadership. For many, this decision signals that the Prime Minister prefers to avoid criticism rather than reflect on the needs of the citizenry, suggesting an authoritarian stance that is closed off to dialogue. Another factor contributing to his fall in popularity is the lack of a clear and coherent plan to address the current economic and social challenges. While his government has implemented some measures, such as establishing a task force to implement free school breakfasts and pledging to end no-fault evictions, these initiatives appear insufficient given the magnitude of the issues the country faces. For the public, these steps seem superficial and belated, failing to address the urgent needs of the most affected sectors amid the economic crisis. The perception is that Starmer is reacting in an improvised manner without a long-term vision, creating insecurity and reducing confidence in his leadership abilities. One issue that has sparked particular outrage among the British public is the recent removal of the fuel allowance for pensioners, implemented under Keir Starmer's leadership. Since 1997, this benefit has been essential for thousands of older individuals, especially during winters in a country where low temperatures temperatures can pose a serious health risk for those already in a precarious economic situation. The decision to withdraw this allowance has been perceived as a direct affront to one of the most vulnerable sectors of the population, sparking a wave of criticism towards the new Labour government, which ironically had pledged to protect pensioners and guarantee them a dignified life. The winter fuel allowance is not just financial support. For many pensioners, it represents a true lifeline. Without this benefit, numerous elderly individuals may be forced to choose between paying for heating or other essentials, raising the risk of cold-related illnesses or even mortality in the winter months. The removal of this support was not in the Labour Party's manifesto, which has increased the sense of betrayal among voters who, by electing Starmer and his party, expected a departure from the austerity policies of the Conservative government. Additionally, the way Starmer's government has handled this cut has left much to be desired in terms of transparency. The decision was announced abruptly without adequate explanation, causing surprise and confusion among the affected population and their families. In a context where the UK is the world's 6th richest economy, many Britons find it incomprehensible that the government has chosen to prioritize cuts in critical social sectors, while tax policies for the wealthiest remain unchanged. This contrast between the lack of support for pensioners and the apparent protection of large capital has been a trigger for public indignation, with many seeing this measure as an act of social injustice. The decision to cut the allowance has had internal political repercussions for Starmer, as it has generated discontent even among members of his own party. Several Labour MPs, particularly those from the more progressive wing, have expressed their disagreement, arguing that this decision undermines the fundamental values of the Labour Party. Among them, John McDonnell, a high-ranking MP, was suspended after publicly speaking out against the measure, which some analysts interpret as an attempt to silence critical voices within the party. McDonnell's suspension has added an authoritarian dimension to Starmer's government, furthering the perception that the Prime Minister is determined to impose his vision without listening to the party base.
And that is history. We can't change our history, and we should start from that place. But the question now at this conference is, do we want to focus more on the challenges now, which to my mind are resilience?
This cut has impacted pensioners not only financially, but also emotionally, as many feel abandoned by a government that ought to protect them. Low-income pensioners, who already live at the limit of their resources, see this cut as a sign of disregard for their needs and sacrifices. For those who have worked all their lives and expected a secure retirement, this measure represents a profound blow that undermines trust in the Labour government and its ability to lead with justice and sensitivity. Many of them have raised their voices in media and public forums, expressing frustration and disillusionment with a government that seems to have strayed from its principles and electoral promises. The lack of sensitivity in implementing this measure has also created a ripple effect in other sectors of society, who now wonder if the government will continue to cut other social benefits affecting the most vulnerable population. The outrage that this cut has sparked has led some pensioners' rights organizations to mobilize and demand that the measure be reversed, arguing that the well-being of the elderly should not be subject to questionable budgetary decisions. These groups have launched campaigns to raise public awareness of the impact of the cuts and to pressure the government, calling for policies that reflect a commitment to the welfare of all citizens, not just the privileged sectors. Meant to combat inequality and provide support to the most vulnerable classes. Instead of being the government of change that promised to ease social tensions, Starmer's administration is seen as a continuation of conservative austerity policies. Keir Starmer's plummeting popularity can also be attributed to his apparent insensitivity to the concerns of low-income groups and pensioners. For years, Britons have felt the weight of austerity policies and cuts implemented by conservative governments, and they expected change with the new Labour government. But rather than relief, they were met with decisions that, to their eyes, reflect a lack of empathy towards their daily struggles. The elimination of the fuel allowance and the restriction of support for larger families, for instance, not only financially impact recipients, but also send a clear message that this government is not willing to prioritize their needs. If you like this video and want to see more content on important issues, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Your support helps us continue creating content. Thanks for being with us, and don't forget to share this video. See you next time.